Have you ever really thought about what it means for us as citizens to experience genuine freedom and protection in a democracy? And what happens when those basic assurances just aren't there? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a really crucial look at something fundamental, the bedrock of any democratic society, our rights. We'll unpack this whole concept of democratic rights, look at the stark reality of life without them. Then we'll pivot to a detailed exploration, the specific fundamental rights we have in the Indian Constitution. We'll also dig into how these rights are protected, how they're enforced, and how their scope is actually growing over time. This deep dive is designed for you, especially if you're preparing for academic exams, classes 9, 10, 11, 12, or those competitive exams like UPSC, SSC, state PSCs. Our goal is clear, comprehensive understanding. Okay, let's kick things off. Imagine a life where basic freedoms are just denied. What does that actually look like? Let's maybe use some real-world examples.
It's a pretty sobering picture, definitely. And we could look at a few cases that really highlight the impact. Take the situation at Guantanamo Bay prison. About 600 people were, secretly detained by U.S. forces. They were picked up from various places and held in this facility near Cuba, controlled by the American Navy. And Jamil El-Banna's father, he was one of them. The U.S. government claimed they were enemies, linked to the 9/11 attacks. But here's the shocking part. In most cases, their own home governments weren't even told. Families, like El-Banna's, found out through the media. That's it. No families, not even UN representatives, were allowed to meet them. The U.S. Army arrested them, interrogated them, decided their fate, all without any trial before a U.S. magistrate. And these prisoners, they couldn't approach courts in their own countries either. There's no legal avenue. Amnesty International, they reported credible accounts of torture. This violated U.S. laws, international treaties. These people weren't even given the basic treatment expected for prisoners of war. Even when some were officially declared not guilty, many just weren't released. The UN Secretary General actually called for the prison to be closed, but, the U.S. government refused.
Wow. So what you're describing is a total breakdown of due process, right? The right to know why you're held, to face a trial, even just to talk to a lawyer, gone. How absolutely vital is that due process part for freedom?
Oh, it's fundamental. Absolutely foundational. Without due process, the state can basically act however it wants with no checks. Individual liberty just vanishes. It's the mechanism that really makes the rule of law meaningful, ensuring everyone, even the powerful, is bound by legal rules.
Right.
And that actually leads nicely into our next example, which shows a different kind of rights issue in Saudi Arabia. It's a hereditary monarchy, right?
Yeah.
The king inherits the position. Crucially, the people have zero say in electing or changing their rulers. The king chooses the legislature, the executive appoints judges, and he can overrule any of their decisions. Citizens, they're explicitly banned from forming political parties or any kind of political organizations. And the media, heavily censored. No freedom there.
That's a really chilling picture. No political voice, no free expression, and not even basic things like religious choice or being equal before the law. It sounds like there's just no way to challenge the state. And, it's easy to think this only happens in places like monarchies, non-democracies, but the story from Kosovo, that shows something even scarier, doesn't it? That even an elected government can violate rights.
Exactly. The ethnic massacre in Kosovo is a terrible reminder that just having elections isn't a magic bullet for rights. Kosovo, it was a province of Yugoslavia, overwhelmingly ethnic Albanian population, but in the wider country, Serbs were the majority. A Serb nationalist, Milosevic, he won the election. His government then went after the Kosovo Albanians with really hostile policies, aiming for Serb dominance. Many Serb leaders basically felt minorities should just leave or accept Serb rule. Then, in April 1999, there's this harrowing account from Batisha Haksa, 74 years old. She described Serbian soldiers bursting into her home, shooting her 77-year-old husband right there, burning her house down, forcing her out. And this horrific massacre, this wasn't some rogue group. It was carried out by the army of their own country, under a leader who was democratically elected. It's one of the worst examples of ethnic killing in recent history. Milosevic was eventually tried by the International Court of Justice for crimes against humanity because of it.
What's so deeply disturbing there is seeing how a leader chosen through elections could still orchestrate such profound violations of basic human rights. It really hammers home a critical point. Elections aren't enough on their own. You absolutely need strong, enforceable protections to shield citizens, sometimes even from their own government.
Precisely. Rights need to be embedded, protected, put beyond the reach of any government, elected or not.
Okay, those global examples paint a pretty stark picture of what happens when rights are missing or just ignored. It feels distant, maybe, but for us here, especially our listeners in India preparing for exams, it raises a question, doesn't it? Can we see echoes of these kinds of issues, maybe on a different scale in our own country? How do these struggles for basic dignity play out closer to home?
Yeah, that's a fair question. While we don't have, thankfully, exact parallels in scale or nature to, say, ethnic cleansing or secret detentions like Guantanamo, the underlying issues of rights violations, well, they can unfortunately surface anywhere, including here. For instance, you often see newspaper reports about concerns over custodial violence that directly touches on due process, right? Or cases where prisoners on hunger strikes are force-fed that raises fundamental questions about personal liberty and bodily autonomy. And sadly, we do see instances of ethnic violence or unequal treatment of women sometimes. These demonstrate that the core principles we're discussing, the need for rights, for dignity, they're universal concerns, even if the specific problems look different place to place. So these examples from Guantanamo to Kosovo and even thinking about potential issues here, they all really underscore why defining and protecting rights is just so incredibly crucial.
Right. Given those stark realities, it's crystal clear why rights matter so much. So let's pin down a definition now. What exactly are rights when we talk about them in this context?
Okay, at their core, rights are basically claims. Claims of a person over other people, over society as a whole, and over the government. We all want to live happily, right? Without fear, without being treated in degrading ways. To get there, we expect others to behave in ways that respect our well-being. But here's the key thing. A claim only really becomes a right if it's something that's equally possible for everyone else to claim too. Like you can't claim a right to, I don't know, play cricket in a way that smashes your neighbor's window every time. That's not reasonable. Or, thinking back to Yugoslavia, the Serbs couldn't reasonably claim the entire country just for themselves, ignoring other ethnic groups. So a right has to be a reasonable claim, and it automatically comes with an obligation. You have to respect the rights of others too. It's a two-way street.
That's a really important distinction. A right isn't just a free pass to do anything. It's a reciprocal thing within a society. So for a claim like that to actually mean something, to be enforceable, what does it need?
Good question. For a claim to become a proper enforceable right, it generally needs three qualities. First, it has to be a reasonable claim, as we said. It needs to align with basic ideas of justice, human dignity. Second, it needs to be recognized by society. Rights really only have meaning in a social context. What society accepts as rightful can change a lot over time and across cultures. I mean, think about it. 200 years ago, the idea of women having the right to vote would have seemed totally strange to many. Today, denying that right, like in Saudi Arabia, seems unjust and odd to most of us. Third, and this is crucial, it must be sanctioned by law. This is what gives a claim real teeth, makes it enforceable. Remember those prisoners in Guantanamo? They had a strong moral claim not to be tortured, right? But they couldn't actually go to a court to stop it because for them in that specific situation, that claim wasn't sanctioned by law in a way they could access. When the law recognizes these reasonable, socially accepted claims, they become actual rights. Then we can demand they be applied. If someone violates our rights, another citizen, or the government, we can go to the courts for protection. That's the power of legal sanction.
Okay, we've seen what happens without them. We've defined what they are. But why are rights not just, nice additions, but absolutely essential for a democracy to even work, to survive and thrive?
Oh, they're far more than nice to haves. They are absolutely necessary for the very sustenance of a democracy. Think about the basic processes. Every citizen needs the right to vote and the right to stand for election. That's fundamental. For democratic elections to even happen meaningfully, citizens must have the rights to express their opinions freely, to form political parties, and to take part in political activities. Without these, participation is just, well, meaningless. It's not real democracy. But there's another vital role rights play. Beyond just enabling participation, they act as critical guarantees. Guarantees that protect minorities from potential oppression by the majority. They make sure the majority can't just do whatever it wants simply because it has the numbers or the power. This is especially important when a majority group might try to dominate or suppress minorities. Now, ideally, the government should protect everyone's rights in these situations. But as we saw tragically in Kosovo, even elected governments can sometimes fail to protect, or worse, actively attack the rights of their own citizens. And that's precisely why some rights need to be placed higher than the government itself. They're often written right into the Constitution, making them fundamental, so that even powerful elected governments cannot simply violate them.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for us here in India. Our Constitution specifically gives certain rights this special elevated status. Let's dive into our fundamental rights. These really are the heart of our democratic promise, aren't they?
They truly are. In India, like in many established democracies, our Constitution lists these essential rights very clearly and gives them that special status as fundamental rights. You'll remember from our preamble, the Constitution promises to secure equality, liberty, and justice for all citizens. These fundamental rights are basically the tools, the concrete ways that promise is delivered. Our Constitution outlines 6 main categories of fundamental rights. Let's break them down one by one. First up is the right to equality. The Constitution clearly states the government cannot deny any person in India equality before the law or the equal protection of the laws. This core idea is what we call the rule of law. It means the laws apply equally to absolutely everyone, no matter their status, from the Prime Minister right down to a small farmer. There was actually a case involving a former Prime Minister of India who faced cheating charges. He had to appear in court, give evidence, file papers, just like any ordinary citizen would have to. It's the powerful illustration that nobody is above the law. This right also explicitly forbids discrimination based on religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth.
Every single citizen has guaranteed equal access to all public places, shops, restaurants, hotels, cinemas, yes, but also public wells, tanks, bathing gats, roads, playgrounds, all of it. This was incredibly important in India's history, specifically designed to help dismantle the oppressive traditional caste system. Furthermore, it guarantees equality of opportunity in public employment. No citizen can be discriminated against or considered ineligible for a government job based on those grounds we mentioned.
That's a really powerful statement about dignity and access for everyone. But what about reservations? The special provisions for certain groups like SCs, STs, OBCs. Some people ask how that fits with the idea of equality.
That's a really important question, and it comes up a lot. The key insight here is that real equality isn't always about treating everyone exactly the same. Sometimes it's about ensuring everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed. For centuries, certain groups faced huge systemic disadvantages, historical injustices. Reservations are meant as a measure, often seen as temporary, to try and level that playing field, to give a boost, if you like, to help those historically marginalized groups actually compete fairly and reach their potential. It's about achieving what we call substantive equality, not just formal, on-paper equality. The right to equality also includes the absolute abolition of untouchability in any form. It's a punishable offense. And this isn't just about literal physical touch. It refers to any belief or social practice that looks down on people because of their birth caste, denying them interaction or access to public places as equals. The source material gives examples like tea stalls using separate cups for Dalits, barbers refusing to serve Dalit clients, making Dalit students sit separately or use different water sources, even washing a hand pump after a Dalit person used it. All these are considered forms of untouchability and are illegal. Okay, moving on. We have the right to freedom. Freedom in this sense means the absence of unfair constraints or arbitrary interference in our lives. The Indian Constitution guarantees all citizens 6 core freedoms, which are really the pillars of individual liberty. These are freedom of speech and expression, the right to assemble peacefully without weapons, freedom to form associations and unions, freedom to move freely anywhere in the country, freedom to reside in any part of India, and the freedom to practice any profession, occupation, trade, or business. These are the everyday freedoms that define being a free citizen.
These freedoms sound incredibly broad, almost like you can do anything. Is there a line, though? Can freedom go too far, maybe harm others?
Absolutely, there's a crucial balance. It's vital to understand that freedom is not an unlimited license. Your freedom ends where someone else's rights begin, essentially. You can't use your freedom in a way that violates other people's rights or creates, say, public nuisance or disorder. The government can impose reasonable restrictions on these freedoms, but only in the larger interest of society. For example, you have freedom of speech and expression. That lets you criticize the government, express your views in newspapers, magazines, art, whatever. But it doesn't give you the right to incite violence or encourage rebellion or defame someone. Similarly, you can hold peaceful meetings, rallies, demonstrations, but they must be unarmed and shouldn't disrupt public order. The freedom to travel and live anywhere. That allows someone from, say, Assam to move to Hyderabad and start a business, fostering national integration and economic opportunity. Freedom to choose your job means no one can force you into an occupation or stop you from doing a job just because of your gender or caste. And perhaps most critically, the Constitution protects life or personal liberty.
It says no person can be deprived of these except according to procedure established by law. This means no one can be killed unless a court orders it after a proper trial. No one can be arrested or detained without a valid legal reason. If you are arrested, you must be told why. You must be brought before a magistrate within 24 hours, and you have the right to consult a lawyer. This is the direct safeguard against the kind of arbitrary detentions we saw in Guantanamo or the lack of process in Kosovo. Okay, our third fundamental right, the right against exploitation. Now, even with strong rights to liberty and equality, the Constitution's framers knew they needed specific rules to protect the most vulnerable from being exploited. So this right declares three specific evils illegal and makes them punishable. First is traffic in human beings. This means the buying and selling of people, often women and children, for immoral purposes or forced labor, completely outlawed. Second is forced labor, or bigar, as it's commonly known in India. This is when someone is forced to work without proper pay, or maybe for just a tiny amount, or even for free. If this goes on for a lifetime, it becomes bonded labor, which is essentially a form of modern slavery. The Constitution bans this completely. Third, the Constitution strictly prohibits child labor. It forbids employing children under the age of 14 in factories, mines, or any other hazardous work. The examples given include things like making beads, firecrackers, printing, dyeing. News reports, unfortunately, often highlight how serious this still is, mentioning past instances like child auctions in Kerala or kids working in iron ore mines in Karnataka. This right is meant to be a strong shield for those who can't easily protect themselves. Next, we come to the right to freedom of religion. India, as we know, is constitutionally a secular state. What this means is that the state keeps a principled and equal distance from all religions. It stays neutral, impartial, doesn't promote any one religion over others. Every person has the right to profess, practice, and propagate their own religion. However, propagating religion doesn't mean you can force someone to convert using coercion, fraud, or trickery, or by offering inducements. Voluntary conversion, though, is perfectly allowed. Also, the freedom to practice religion isn't absolute. It doesn't permit practices like, say, animal or human sacrifice, or social practices that treat women as inferior, like forcing a widow to shave her head or wear only white clothes. Women's freedom must be respected. The state also plays a non-discriminatory role. It doesn't give special privileges to any religion. It can't levy taxes specifically for religious purposes. Government schools can't provide religious instruction. And even in private institutions, no one can be forced to participate in religious worship against their will. And finally, number 6, cultural and educational rights. These were put in specifically to protect minorities, both linguistic minorities and religious minorities. Why? Because in a democracy, the majority naturally holds more power, and there was a concern that the culture and language of smaller groups might get neglected or undermined. So these provisions guarantee that any section of citizens that has a distinct language, script, or culture have the right to conserve it, to protect and maintain it. Also, admission to any educational institution run or aided by the government cannot be denied to anyone just based on their religion or language. And importantly, all minorities have the fundamental right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. They can set up their own schools and colleges to preserve their culture and language. And remember, minority here doesn't just mean religious minorities at the national level. It can also mean linguistic minorities within a particular state. So, for example, Telugu speakers living in Karnataka would be a linguistic minority there, or Sikhs living in Rajasthan. This ensures their unique identities are also protected.
Okay, so it's one thing to have these incredibly powerful rights written down in the Constitution. That's huge. But, history shows us laws on paper don't always translate to reality. How does our system actually make sure these rights are respected? How are they enforced? And are these rights set in stone, or do they kind of evolve as society changes?
That's the absolutely critical next step, isn't it? Because a right without a way to enforce it, well, it's not much of a right at all. Thankfully, our Constitution provides really robust ways to secure these rights, and yes, their scope has definitely expanded over time. It's a living system. The most important enforcement mechanism is the right to constitutional remedies. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar famously called this particular right the heart and soul of our Constitution. Why? Because it's the right that makes all the other fundamental rights effective, makes them real and enforceable. If any of your fundamental rights are violated, you have the power to go directly to the Supreme Court or a high court to seek a remedy. You don't have to go through lower courts first for these specific rights. And this right holds true against actions by the legislatures if they pass a bad law, the executive if the government acts wrongly, or any other government authority. Any law or action that violates a fundamental right is considered invalid and can be challenged in court.
That's incredibly powerful. The idea that any citizen can directly petition the highest courts if their basic freedoms are under threat, that's huge. So what can the courts actually do to enforce these rights?
They have significant powers. The Supreme Court and high courts can issue directions, orders, or specific legal instruments called writs to enforce fundamental rights. They can also order compensation to be paid to victims, or even punish those found guilty of violating rights. Our judiciary is independent and powerful, acting as the ultimate guardian of these rights. There's something else really important here: public interest litigation, or PIL. Through PIL, any citizen or group can approach the Supreme Court or a high court if they see a violation of public interest due to a particular law or government action. They don't even need to be the direct victim. Sometimes even just a simple letter or a postcard sent to the court, if the judges find merit in it concerning public interest, can be treated as a PIL. This has really opened up access to justice for many people. Beyond the courts, there's another important body, the National Human Rights Commission, the NHRC. This is an independent commission, set up by law back in 1993. Its main focus is helping victims secure their human rights, which include fundamental rights, but can be broader too. The NHRC has pretty wide powers. It can inquire into violations, summon witnesses, question government officials, demand relevant documents, and even inspect prisons or detention centers. Now, it can't directly punish the guilty, that's still the job of the courts, but it conducts independent, credible inquiries, presents its findings and recommendations to the government, and can even step in during court proceedings on behalf of victims. There are also state human rights commissions in many states, making it easier for people to file complaints, maybe just by writing a letter. The NHRC also looks at rights mentioned in international treaties that India has signed, considering them as human rights within its scope. So it brings in a global perspective too. Right, and finally, let's touch upon the expanding scope of rights. This is really fascinating. Rights aren't static, frozen in time from when the Constitution was written. They're not limited only to those specific fundamental rights listed. Their scope has grown quite a bit over the years. It shows our democracy is alive, evolving. How has this happened? Well, partly through court judgments. Courts have interpreted existing fundamental rights, like the right to life or freedom of speech, and derived new legal rights from them. For instance, the right of freedom of the press, the right to information, even the right to education. These were initially expanded through court interpretations before some became specific laws. And that leads to the other way they expand: legislative action. Parliament has enacted laws like the Right to Education Act, making school education up to age 14 a legal right for children, and the Right to Information Act, which flows from the freedom of thought and expression, gives us the power to seek information from government offices. That's a huge tool for transparency. A key example is how the Supreme Court expanded the right to life. They ruled it includes the right to food, arguing that just being alive isn't enough. You need basic sustenance for life to have meaning.
That's a really amazing evolution, isn't it? It shows the Constitution isn't just some historical document, but a living framework that adapts to what society needs and understands over time. Are there other rights, maybe not fundamental, but still important?
Well, definitely. There are other significant constitutional rights that aren't listed under fundamental rights. For example, the right to property. It used to be a fundamental right. Now it's a constitutional right, which still offers protection but is slightly different legally. And, of course, the crucial right to vote in elections is a constitutional right, fundamental to democracy itself, though listed separately. The expansion also pushes into the broader realm of human rights. These are often seen as universal moral claims, things people believe everyone deserves, which may or may not yet be fully recognized in law. International agreements, like the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, influence this. They talk about rights like the right to work, to health, to an adequate standard of living. There's growing pressure on governments worldwide to recognize and implement these. So this whole ongoing evolution shows how new rights emerge from people's struggles, from court decisions, from society developing. You see this very clearly in newer constitutions like South Africa's, which explicitly includes rights like privacy, a healthy environment, access to housing and healthcare. It really demonstrates that the pursuit of dignity and justice is a continuous journey.
Wow. What a comprehensive journey we've taken today. We started by looking at, well, the bleak picture of life without rights. Then we defined what rights actually are, why they're absolutely crucial for democracy. Then we dove deep into those powerful fundamental rights in our own Indian Constitution: equality, freedom against exploitation, freedom of religion, cultural and educational rights. And finally, we saw how these rights are secured and how their meaning and scope keep evolving, keep expanding, adapting to our world.
Exactly. And this expansion of rights, it really reflects a society's progress, doesn't it? And the ongoing vital struggle for dignity and justice for every single person. So as you prepare for your exams, try to remember these concepts aren't just abstract points to memorize. They are truly the living fabric of our democratic life, shaping our reality every single day.
Stay tuned for more exam-ready insights with the Deep Dive. Subscribe now so you never miss a topic breakdown. In this deep dive, we covered the following topics: life without rights, what are rights and why do we need them? Fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution, including the right to equality, right to freedom, right against exploitation, right to freedom of religion, and cultural and educational rights. We also discussed securing and expanding the scope